Hello, this is Professor Wergeles. In the previous lecture, we started MySQL on our Amazon EC2. We then connected to MySQL through the command line. We saw that the command line was difficult, so we hooked up MySQL Workbench and connected that to our EC2 instance. We then created a new user, and this new user we're going to use in our PHP code for the PHP code to connect to the MySQL database. So we'll start out by downloading this code. Make sure you unzip it. Okay, download the code, unzip it, and then we're going to put that on our database. So we'll be using FileZilla. If you store your server already, you can go to Site Manager, do a double click. Click OK. This code will have PHP in it, so we'll need to run it on our servers so we can execute that PHP. Okay, I'm going to put that code that we downloaded in our lectures directory. Okay, so here's the code. I'll just drag and drop, upload it to my server, go into it. We're going to be working in number 1, intro. If I open up intro, I'm going to open up connect.php. Now in this code, what we're going to do is use that new user to connect to our MySQL database. Okay, so here's the code. In order for me to connect using PHP, I'm going to use MySQL. Now MySQL is basically the old PHP MySQL, but upgraded. So if I go to MySQL and go to W3 Schools, you'll see PHP MySQL is equal to PHP MySQL improved. MySQL has functions that allow you to access MySQL database servers. And you'll see a bunch of functions available. And we're going to use these functions in order to execute our queries. But in order for me to connect, I need 4 parameters. The first is the database host. Now the host is going to be localhost because we executed this MySQL database on our EC2 instance, and the PHP code is also ran on the EC2 instance. We also need the database user, which is going to be the user we created in the previous video, EC2-user, the same as our SSH username. Now the DB pass may be different. I put my name. You may have put your name, or you may have copied the video directly and put my name. We also need the database name. If you remember in the SQL terminal or in MySQL Workbench, we always had to select the database first, which is what we're doing here. The database is called CS2830. You'll see I'm creating a new instance of MySQL and storing that to a variable called MySQL. Now this MySQL variable is our connection. So it contains a lot of information like whether there was a connect error and what the error number is or what the message is. It also has the host info. We'll also use this MySQL connection to execute our queries. So when I run new keyword with MySQL that's going to return the connection whether it's successful or not, in addition to a bunch of information associated with that connection. So I'm going to save this, upload it to the server, and then we can run it. So if you go to your domain or your public DNS, okay, go to your lectures directory, go into database with PHP, go into intro, open up connect.php. You should see a connected message. So we successfully connected to the PHP server. Now I can only do this if 1, MySQL server has been started. After it's been started, I need to create the user. After I create the user, then I can connect using that username and password with MySQL or PHP. After I'm connected, I can then go ahead and create a query. So if I want to create a query, I can do it by having a variable. Let's have a string. I'm going to do a select star from our database name, which was food stock. That was our second database we created with the constraints, where cost is greater than 10. We executed this query in the previous lecture. Now, after I build the query string, it's a good idea to go ahead and print the query out and then exit this code. A lot of times I see students, they're running their PHP scripts, the PHP code executes correctly, and then they messed up their MySQL query. So they're running the PHP code, everything's running correctly, and the PHP code does not return any compile errors, and they're wondering why they're not getting any results. Okay, they're not getting any results a lot of times is because the query is incorrect. Now, this query is just made with a string, so I can literally copy this string and paste it into MySQL Workbench. But a lot of times you'll be concatenating strings. So you'll do a concatenation, you'll concatenate it with something else, or you may concatenate it with a PHP variable. Okay, in this case, you want to print the query out to see if that final concatenation is correct. A lot of times there'll be a space missing, or you'll misspell one of the words. So you'll print the query out, exit the code. So let's see what happens here. I'm going to update the code here on the server. Go back to the browser, do a refresh. You should see that query right here. So I can select this query, and then we connect it through MySQL Workbench. So I can open up MySQL Workbench, go back to my server. I can actually copy and paste this command. So I'm going to copy and paste that command, put a semicolon, and run it. Okay, you'll see here I need to select the database. So if I come back, I can do a use CS2830, select the database. I got an OK message. So now I can run this query to see if it's executing properly. You'll see it executes, and I got back 3 rows. So these are the rows I should get back with the PHP code. Once the query is correct, I can comment this out and continue writing my PHP code. Now with PHP, if I want to execute the query, I need to store the result and call the connection string. So that's going to be the MySQL I variable up here. I need to call the connection and run this query. So I'm going to do it by calling the query function and passing my query string as a parameter. Now when this result comes back, I can go ahead and try to print it recursively. So if I do a print recursively on the result, okay, it's going to loop through whatever result is and print that to the screen. So I may also want to print some new line breaks. Okay, so I may print some line breaks for the HTML and also a new line break if I run this in the terminal. So I'll update the code on the server, execute it, and see what we get. So if I'm able to connect to the connect to MySQL using PHP, I should be able to create the query. If the query is correct, then run the query and see what the result is. So I come back here, refresh the page. You'll see the result is an object. The object has a field count of 5, and the number of rows is 3. So I have 5 fields and 3 rows. Well, if I want to grab the rows, I could use this statement right here. It's called fetch associative. So if I say result, which is coming back from the query, fetch associative, I can print that out and see what we have. Okay, so I will print that out. I'll update the code on the database, come back here, refresh the page. Now you'll see I have an array. ID is equal to 3, name is equal to Baozi, quantity is equal to 1, cost is equal to 1650, purchase date doesn't have a value. If I come back to the database, you'll see that's my first record here. Okay, that's my first record. So fetch associative will grab that first row and then turn it into an associative array. So I can access it using key value pairs. Usually what we'll do is we will put this in a while loop. Okay, so I have a while loop. I'll go through all the rows, fetch associative, each row, and I'll print out the key value pair. So if I call the key, it's going to print back the value. Okay, so I can say I have whatever the quantity is, name, for how much dollars, and then I print a new line. Okay, so this will print out each row. When fetch associative, when there's no more rows, this will return false, and the while loop will finish executing. Okay, we'll also want to remember every time you have a result, you want to make sure you clear that result. Every time you have a connection, MySQL, you want to make sure you close that connection. If I don't close the result, I'll have a memory leak. And if I leave the connection open, it's insecure. Somebody could hack into my database very easily. So I'll update the code. I'll run it, see if I can print out the data. Okay, so I'll do a refresh. You'll see, let's get rid of this here. Let's see, so I did a connection. Let's do a line break after this so I can actually see it print out really nice. Okay, so I'll do a refresh. You'll see I connected, and then I printed out 3 rows. I have 1 baozi for $16.50. I have 2 dim sum for $20. I have 4 herbs for $20. Okay, if I come back to the database, that's also what we had in the database. Okay, so it matches. I'm able to connect using PHP. I'm able to output the results in a nice formatted fashion. I'm able to print a line break. Then I always clear the result so I don't have a memory leak, and also close the database connection so it's more secure. Okay, now once this is working, this is how the PHP script will look, especially for a login. So for a login, I'll connect to the database, make sure the query is correct by printing it out. Once the query is correct, run the query, fetch back the results. Okay, if the username and password is correct, then I let the front end know, and then I'll update to the home page or show hidden content. Now, it's going to take a lot of code in order for me to connect, put the credentials and connect each time. It's also insecure. If somebody were to hack in and see this PHP code, they would have access to my username and password as well as the database name. Now, luckily, this user is a restricted user. They're only able to insert, select, and update. Okay, so they can't delete data, but they could still access the data, and we don't want that. So what we could do is we could take this out of the code and actually put it into a DB credentials file. Now, the DB credentials file, we could either just put the credentials, or we can also put the connection. That way we don't have to connect and write this code several times. But for now, we're just going to put the DB credentials there. So if I want to take this out and not write it each time, I'm going to do a require once. I'm going to go back a directory. It's going to be db.config. Okay, so my db.config is going to be a restricted file. I can make it where only the administrator can open this file. That way it's secure. Once I do a require once, everything in this file is going to be copied and pasted right here. So whatever the credentials are, it's going to be copied and pasted right here. So let's look and open up that file. So I'll go to FileZilla. Make sure you update that code. Go back a directory. You see the ... here. We went back a directory ... and then into db-config. So I can write the configuration just once. So our host name, so we had db host, was our local host. You'll see this is just PHP code. I have a PHP start tag, PHP variable. That'll be copied and pasted into the file after we run require once. We had db user, which was equal to ec2-user. We also had the password, which was called dbpass. I set this to my name. You may have set it to your name. Also, we had to specify the DB database name. Database name was CS2830. Okay, save this file once it's finished. Come back over here. You'll see it doesn't have a PHP extension, so brackets doesn't recognize it as a PHP file. But in fact, it is a PHP script. Save it. Come back to your connection, and we can test to see if this works. I can do a print. So I can do a print saying using db.config, do a new line, and I can do something like this. I can actually print those variables out. So I can print, let's say db host is equal to our variable db host. So you can see I can actually access these variables directly. I can copy and paste this 3 times. Okay, we're going to change it. Instead of host, the next one's going to be DB user. Next one is going to be DB pass. Last one is DB name. Okay, so we can see if this is working correctly. I'll save this file. We can do an exit here. Don't run the rest of the code unless this is working. Okay, so exit's a good way to test your PHP code. So you just run segments of it. Do a refresh, you'll see this. You'll see here I have DB host as localhost, DB users EC2 user. We probably should put some line breaks there so you can see it easier. Okay, save it again. Re-upload. Come back to the browser, refresh. Okay, you'll see EC2 user, DB pass is Nick, and database name CS2830. When this is correct, I can comment this out and make sure the code still runs. Okay, so it's more secure to put your credentials in a DB config file as well as not having to write these 4 lines of code in every file. Now, I've seen students also put the connection string in there, and whether it's successful or not, that's fine too. Okay, then you don't have to write this new MySQL every time. You can write it once in the db.config file. So I come back, refresh, you should see our selection again with the 3 rows. Okay, so we learned a lot here. We were able to connect to MySQL and see if there's an error or not. If I put the wrong credentials, what's nice is it tells you what the error is. So let's say I misspelled the username. Come back, update the code. PHP will tell me what the error is. So if I do a refresh, you'll see access denied for this user at localhost. I'm using a password, but the username was spelled wrong. Okay, so I can come back here. If I misspelled the database name, okay, PHP, I'll get a nice error message saying what's going on. It also has the error code. So if I do a refresh, you'll see access denied, EC2 user is correct, but the database is incorrect. Okay, one problem with PHP though is it doesn't tell you if your query is wrong. So if the query is wrong, you just won't get back any results. Your PHP script will run, but nothing will display. So then you know your query is wrong. You can go back and test your query. So we connected to the database. If there's an error, go ahead and kill the script. No reason to execute anymore. So this is like an exit and print an error message. Otherwise, print it's connected is true in the host. Build the query, execute the query, grab the results, make sure you close the results so there's no memory leak, and exit the connection. Then there's no reason to type these credentials in every file, so I can do a DB configuration file, which will help limit the amount of code that I write. Okay, that's all for today. We'll see you in the next video.